Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve while rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? What is this strange thing, this strange idea, this podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to? Lack of sleep is a health crisis, and this is a podcast intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning in emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. The main idea behind Sleepy Time Tales is that you use it as a distraction to what keeps you awake at night. Or maybe you can use it as background noise, or I can just be here as company. As far as I know, there are a couple of different ways to engage with the show. The primary idea is that it gives you something to focus on, a story or an event that lets you keep your mind on a specific point, to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties, to help you to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of a night's sleep when it comes for you. Or maybe you just need a little bit of background noise. Some people like white noise or the sound of the ocean or the wind in the trees, or maybe just some boring dude droning on in the background. But as you're listening, try not to force the sleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the thread of the story and allow your natural need for sleep to come for you. Now, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night, the odds are actually pretty good this won't work for you. I suggest giving it at least 3 nights solid try to see if you can get used to it. To get used to listening to my voice, my slightly strange accent, the strangeness of trusting someone to talk to you while you're asleep. Or maybe your problem isn't so much going to sleep. Maybe you find yourself waking up in the middle of the night. What I recommend in this case is to let the podcast run all night. Download a whole bunch of episodes in your podcast player of choice, put them into a playlist. When you go to bed, start them and then let them go. This way, if you ever find yourself awake in the middle of the night, you can just carry on listening and go straight back to sleep again. And maybe you even wake up a little bit before your alarm, 60 minutes or as little as 30 minutes. If that's the case, you can do the same thing. Just carry on listening, allow yourself to drift off again. And it may sound a bit strange and pointless. What good is an extra 30 minutes of sleep? But there is something about allowing yourself complete relaxation right before the alarm that's satisfying on a whole new level. But as you're listening, it's very important that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may seem strange to you, so give it a chance. Because I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Before we get on with the show, I'd like to ask for a couple of minutes of your time. If you are able to, and you would like to help support Sleepy Time Tales, To help me keep it going out to thousands of insomniacs just like you, please consider supporting me on my Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This monthly support helps me keep the lights on and gets you fun bonuses based on your contribution level. From as little as $2 a month, you get weekly access to early release on the main episodes, so that you get your fresh sleep aid on a Wednesday instead of a Sunday, and $5 a month gets you weekly bonus minisodes, special edits, and a monthly megasode, which is all of the month's releases in one big listen. This is the biggest way to help out with the show, and any help is much appreciated. Every dollar counts. Although if you can't, please don't worry about it. But if you are able to help us out, please consider it. And of course, it's possible that monthly is a big ask. In that case, you can make once-off tips through the tip jar on the website. And a reminder that I am now working professionally as a podcast editor and post-producer. So if you want to start a podcast or you have a podcast and would like to offload some of the work, drop me a line at my details in the show notes, and we can have a chat about how I can help make your life a lot easier. And that's it for tonight. I'm going to keep it short. Thanks for your time. Let's get back to the show. We return this week to The Elements of Geology by William Harmon Norton. River valleys. In their courses to the sea, rivers follow valleys of various forms, some shallow and some deep, some narrow and some wide. Since rivers are known to erode their beds and banks, it is a fair presumption that, aided by the weather, they have excavated the valleys in which they flow. Moreover, a bird's-eye view or map of a region shows the significant fact that the valleys of a system unite with one another in a branchwork, as twigs meet their stems and the branches of a tree its trunk. Each valley, from that of the smallest rivulet to that of the master stream, is proportionate to the size of the stream which occupies it. With a few explainable exceptions, the valleys of the tributaries join that of the trunk stream at a level. There is no sudden descent or break in the bed at the point of juncture. These are the natural consequences which must follow if the land has long been worked upon by streams, and no other process has ever been suggested which is competent to produce them. We must conclude that valley systems have been formed by the river systems which drain them, aided by the work of the weather. They are not gaping fissures in the earth's crust, as early observers imagined, but are the furrows which running water has drawn upon the land. As valleys are made by the slow wear of streams and the action of the weather, they pass in their development through successive stages, each of which has its own characteristic features. We may therefore classify rivers and valleys according to the stage which they have reached in their life history, from infancy to old age. Infancy. The Red River of the North. A region in northwestern Minnesota and the adjacent portions of North Dakota and Manitoba was so recently covered by the waters of an extinct lake, known as Lake Agassiz, that the surface remains much as it was left when the lake was drained away. The flat floor, spread smooth with lake-laid silts, is still a plain, to the eye as level as the sea. Across it, the Red River of the North and its branches run in narrow, ditch-like channels, steep-sided and shallow, not exceeding 60 feet in depth, their gradients differing little from the general slopes of the region. The trunk streams have but few tributaries. The river system, like a sapling with few limbs, is still undeveloped. Along the banks of the trunk stream, short gullies are slowly lengthening headwards, like growing twigs, which are sometime to become large branches. The flat interstream areas are as yet but little scored by drainage lines, and in wet weather water lingers in ponds in any initial depressions on the plain. In order to read the topographic maps of the textbook in the laboratory, the student should know that contours are lines drawn on maps to represent relief. All points on any given contour being of equal height above sea level. The contour interval is the uniform vertical distance between two adjacent contours and varies on different maps. To express regions of faint relief, a contour interval of 10 or 20 feet is commonly selected, while in mountainous regions, a contour interval of 250, 500, or even 1,000 feet may be necessary in order that the contours may not be too crowded for easy reading. Whether a river begins its life on a lake plain, as in the example just cited, or upon a coastal plain lifted from beneath the sea, or in a spread of glacial drift led by the retreat of continental ice sheets, such as covers much of Canada and the northeastern parts of the United States. Its infantile stage presents the same characteristic features: a narrow and shallow valley with undeveloped tributaries and undrained interstream areas. Groundwater stands high, and exuding in the undrained initial depressions forms marshes and lakes. Lakes are perhaps the most obvious of these fleeting features of infancy. They are short-lived, for their destruction is soon accomplished by several means. As a river system advances towards maturity, the deepening and extending valleys of the tributaries lower the groundwater surface and invade the undrained depressions of the region. Lakes having outlets are drained away as their basin rims are cut down by the outflowing streams. A slow process where the rim is of hard rock, but a rapid one where it is of soft material, such as glacial drift. Lakes are effaced also by the filling of their basins. Inflowing streams and the wash of rains brings in waste. Waves abrade the shore and strew the debris worn from it over the lake bed. Shallow lakes are often filled with organic matter from decaying vegetation. Lake Geneva is a well-known example of a lake in process of obliteration. The inflowing Rhone has already displaced the waters of the lake for a length of 20 miles, with the waste brought down from the high Alps. For this distance there extends up the Rhone Valley an alluvial plain, which has grown lakeward at the rate of 1.5 miles since Roman times, as proved by the distance inland. How rapidly a lake may be salted up under exceptionally favorable conditions is illustrated by the fact that over the bottom of the artificial lake, of 35 square miles, formed behind the great dam across the Colorado River at Austin, Texas, sediments 39 feet deep gathered in 7 years. Lake Mendota, one of the many beautiful lakes of southern Wisconsin, is rapidly cutting back the soft glacial drift of its shores by means of the abrasion of its waves. While the shallow basin is thus broadened, it is also filled with waste, and the time is being brought nearer when it will be so shoaled that vegetation can complete the work of its effacement. Along the margin of a shallow lake, mosses, water lilies, grasses, and other water-loving plants grow luxuriantly. As their decaying remains accumulate on the bottom, the ring of marsh broadens inwards, The lake narrows gradually to a small pond set in the midst of a white bog and finally disappears. All stages in this process of extinction may be seen among the countless lakelets, which occupy sags in the recent sheets of glacial drift in the northern states. And more numerous than the lakes which still remain are those already thus filled with carbonaceous matter derived from the carbon dioxide of the atmosphere. Such fossil lakes are marked by swamps or level meadows underlain with muck. The infantile stage is brief. As a river advances towards maturity, the initial depressions, the lake basins of its area are gradually effaced. By the furrowing action of the rainwash and the headward lengthening of tributaries, a branchwork of drainage channels grows until it covers the entire area. And not an acre is left on which the fallen raindrop does not find already cut for it an uninterrupted downward path, which leads it on by way of gully, brook, and river to the sea. The initial surface of the land, by whatever agency it was modeled, is now wholly destroyed. The region is all reduced to valley slopes. This at first corresponds with the initial surface of the region on which the stream begins to flow, although its way may lead through basins and down steep descents. As the gradient or rate of descent of its bed is lowered, the velocity of the river is decreased until its lessening energy is wholly consumed in carrying its load, and it can no longer erode its bed. The river is now at grade, and its capacity is just equal to its load. If now its load is increased, the stream deposits and thus builds up or grades its bed. On the other hand, if its load is diminished, it has energy to spare, and resuming its work of immersion degrades its bed. In either case, the stream continues aggrading or degrading until a new gradient is found where the velocity is just sufficient to move the load, and here again it reaches grade. Vigorous rivers well armed with waste make short work of cutting their beds to grade, and thus erode narrow steep-sided gorges, only wide enough at the base to accommodate the stream. The steepness of the valley slopes depends on the relative rate at which the bed is cut down by the stream, and the sides are worn back by the weather. In resistant rock, a swift, well-laden stream may soar out a gorge whose sides are nearly, or even quite vertical. But as a rule, young valleys whose streams have not yet reached grade are V-shaped. Their sides flare at the top, because here the rocks have longest been opened up to the action of the weather. Some of the deepest canyons may be found where a rising landmass, either mountain range or plateau, has long maintained by its continued uplift the rivers of the region above grade. The Colorado River trenches the high plateau of northern Arizona with a colossal canyon 218 miles long and more than a mile in greatest depth. The rocks in which the canyon is cut are for the most part flat-lying, massive beds of limestone and sandstone, with some shales, beneath which in places harder crystalline rocks are disclosed. Where the canyon is deepest, its walls have been profoundly dissected. Lateral ravines have widened into immense amphitheaters, leaving between them long ridges of mountain height, buttressed and rebuttressed with flanking spurs and carved into majestic architectural forms. From the extremity of one of these promontories, it is 2 miles or more across the gulf to the point of the one opposite, and the heads of the amphitheaters are 13 miles apart. The lower portion of the canyon is much narrower, and its walls of dark crystalline rock sinks deeply to the edge of the river. A swift, powerful stream, a few 100 feet wide, turbulent with reddish silt, by means of which it continually rasps its rocky bed as it hurries on. The Colorado is still deepening its gorge. In the Grand Canyon, its gradient is 7.5 feet to the mile. But as in all ungraded rivers, the descent is far from uniform. Graded reaches in soft rock alternate with steeper declivities in hard rock, forming rapids such as, for example, a stretch of 10 miles, where the fall averages 21 feet to the mile. Because of these dangerous rapids, the few exploring parties who have traversed the Colorado Canyon have done so at the hazard of their lives. The canyon has been shaped by several agencies. Its depth is due to the river, which has soared its way far toward the base of a lofty rising plateau. Acting alone, this would have produced a slit-like gorge, little wider than the breadth of the stream. The impressive width of the canyon and the magnificent architectural masses which fill it are owing to two causes. Running water has gulched the walls, and weathering has everywhere attacked and driven them back. The horizontal, harder beds stand out in long lines of vertical cliffs, often hundreds of feet in height, at whose feet talus slopes conceal the outcrop of the weaker strata. As the upper cliffs have been sapped and driven back by the weather, broad platforms are left at their bases, and the sides of the canyon descend to the river by gigantic steps. Far up and down the canyon, the eye traces these horizontal layers, like the flutings of an elaborate molding, distinguishing each by its contour as well as by its color and thickness. The Grand Canyon of the Colorado is often and rightly cited as an example of the stupendous erosion which may be accomplished by a river. And yet the Colorado is a young stream, and its work is no more than well begun. It has not yet wholly reached grade, and the great task of the river and its tributaries, the task of leveling the lofty plateau to a low plain, and of transporting it grain by grain to the sea, still lies almost entirely in the future. Before the bed of a stream is reduced to grade, it may be broken by abrupt descents which give rise to waterfalls and rapids. Such breaks in a river's bed may belong to the initial surface over which it began its course. Still more commonly are they developed in the rock mass through which it is cutting its valley. Thus, wherever a stream leaves harder rocks to flow over softer ones, the latter are quickly worn below the level of the former, and a sharp change in slope, with a waterfall or a rapid, results. At time of flood, young tributaries with steeper courses than that of the trunk stream may bring down stones in finer waste, which the gentler current cannot move along, and throw them as a dam across its way. The rapids thus formed are also ephemeral, for as the gradient of the tributaries is lowered, the main stream becomes able to handle the smaller and finer load which they discharge. A rare class of falls is produced where the minor tributaries of a young river are not able to keep pace with their master stream in the erosion of their beds because of their smaller volume, and thus join it by plunging over the side of its gorge. But as the river approaches grade and slackens its downcutting, the tributaries sooner or later overtake it, and effacing their falls unite with it on a level. Waterfalls and rapids of all kinds are evanescent features of a river's youth. Like lakes, they are soon destroyed, and if any long time had already elapsed since their formation, they would have been obliterated already. That balanced condition called grade, where a river neither degrades its bed by erosion nor grades it by deposition, is first attained along reaches of soft rocks, ungraded outcrops of hard rocks remaining as barriers which give rise to rapids or falls. Until these barriers are worn away, they constitute local base levels, below which level the stream, up valley from them, cannot cut. They are eroded to grade one after another, beginning with the least strong, or the one nearest the mouth of the stream. In a similar way, the surface of a lake in a river's course constitutes for all inflowing streams a local base level, which disappears when the basin is filled or drained. Maturity is the stage of a river's complete development and most effective work. The river system now has well underway its great task of wearing down the landmass, which it drains, and carrying it particle by particle to the sea. The relief of the land is now at its greatest, for the main channels have been sunk to grade, while the divides remain, but little worn below their initial altitudes. Groundwater now stands low. The runoff washes directly to the streams, with the least delay and loss by evaporation in ponds and marshes. The discharge of the river is therefore at its height. The entire region is dissected by streamways. The area of valley slopes is now largest and sheds to the streams a heavier load of waste than ever before. At maturity, the river system is doing its greatest amount of work, both in erosion and in the carriage of water and of waste to the sea. On reaching grade, a river ceases to scour its bed, and it does not again begin to do so until some change in load or volume enables it to find grade at a lower level. On the other hand, a stream erodes its banks at all stages in its history, and with graded rivers this process, called lateral erosion or planation, is especially important. The current of a stream follows the outer side of all curves or bends in the channel, and on this side it excavates its bed the deepest and continually wears and saps its banks. On the inner side, deposition takes place in a more shallow and slower moving water. The inner bank of bends is thus built out, while the outer bank is worn away. By swinging its curves against the valley sides, a graded river continually cuts a wider and wider floor. The V-valley of youth is thus changed by planation to a flat-floored valley with flaring sides, which gradually become subdued by the weather to gentle slopes. While widening their valleys, streams maintain a constant width of channel, so that a wide-floored valley does not signify that it was ever occupied by a river of equal width. The gradients of graded rivers differ widely. A large river with a light load reaches grade on a faint slope, while a smaller stream, heavily burdened with waste, requires a steep slope to give it velocity sufficient to move the load. The Platte, a graded river of Nebraska, with its headwaters in the Rocky Mountains, is enfeebled by the semi-arid climate of the Great Plains, and surcharged with the waste brought down both by its branches in the mountains and by those whose tracks lie over the soft rocks of the plains. It is compelled to maintain a gradient of 8 feet to a mile in western Nebraska. The Ohio reaches grade with a slope of less than 4 inches to the mile from Cincinnati to its mouth, and the powerful Mississippi washes along its load with a fall of but 3 inches per mile from Cairo to the Gulf. As rivers pass their prime, as denudation lowers the relief of the region, less waste and finer is washed over the gentler slopes of the lowering hills. With smaller loads to carry, the rivers now deepen their valleys, and find grade with fainter declivities nearer the level of the sea. This limit of the level of the sea beneath which they cannot erode is known as base level. As streams grow old, they approach more and more closely to base level, although they are never able to attain it. Some slight slope is needed that water may flow and waste be transported over the land. Meanwhile, the relief of the land has ever lessened. The master streams and the main tributaries now wander with sluggish currents over the broad valley floors, which they have planed away. While under the erosion of their innumerable branches and the wear of the weather, the divides everywhere are lowered and subdued to more and more gentler slopes. Mountains and high plateaus are thus reduced to rolling hills, and at last to plains, surmounted only by such hills as may still be unreduced to the common level, because of the harder rocks of which they are composed, or because of their distance from the main erosion channels. Such regions of faint relief, worn down to near base level by subaerial agencies, are known as peneplains. Any residual masses which rise above them are called monadnocks, from the name of a conical peak of New Hampshire, which overlooks the now uplifted peneplain of southern New England. In its old age, a region becomes mantled with thick sheets of fine and weathered waste, slowly moving over the faint slopes towards the waterways, and unbroken by ledges of bare rock. In other words, the waste mantle also is now graded, and as waterfalls have been effaced in the riverbeds, so now any ledges in the wide streams of waste are worn away, and covered beneath smooth slopes of fine soil. Groundwater stands high, and may exude an area of swamp. In youth, the landmass was rough-hewn and cut deep by stream erosion. In old age, the faint reliefs of the land dissolve away, chiefly under the action of the weather, beneath their cloak of waste. The successive stages through which a landmass passes while it is being leveled to the sea constitute together a cycle of erosion. Each stage of the cycle from infancy to old age leaves, as we have seen, its characteristic records in the forms sculptured on the land, such as the shapes of valleys and the contours of hills and plains. The geologist is thus able to determine by the landforms of any region the stage in the erosion cycle to which it now belongs. And knowing what are the earlier stages of the cycle, to read something of the geological history of the region. So long a time is needed to reduce a landmass to base level that the process is seldom, if ever, completed during a single uninterrupted cycle of erosion. Of all the various interruptions which may occur, the most important are gradual movements of the Earth's crust, by which a region is either depressed or elevated relative to sea level. The depression of a region hastens its old age by decreasing the gradient of streams, by destroying the power to excavate the beds and carry their loads to a degree corresponding to the amount of the depression, and by lessening the amount of work they have to do. The slackened river currents deposit their waste in hood plains, which increase in height as the subsidence continues. The lower courses of the rivers are invaded by the sea and become estuaries, while the lower tributaries are cut off from the trunk stream. Elevation, on the other hand, increases the activity of all agencies of weathering, erosion, and transportation, restores the region to its youth, and inaugurates a new cycle of erosion. Streams are given a steeper gradient, greater velocity, and increased energy to carry their loads and wear their beds. They cut through the alluvium of their floodplains, leaving it on either bank as successive terraces, and entrench themselves in the underlying rock. In their older and wider valleys, they cut narrow, steep-walled inner gorges, in which they flow swiftly over rocky floors, broken here and there by falls and rapids, where a harder layer of rock has been discovered. Winding streams on plains may thus incise their meanders in solid rock, as the plains are gradually uplifted. Streams which are thus restored to their youth are said to be revived. As streams cut deeper and the valley slopes steepen, the mantle of waste of the region undergoing elevation is set in more rapid movement. It is now removed particle by particle faster than it forms. As the waste mantle thins, weathering attacks the rocks of the region more energetically, until an equilibrium is reached again. The rocks waste rapidly, and their waste is as rapidly removed. When a rise of the land brings one cycle to an end and begins another, the characteristic landforms of each cycle are found together, and the topography of the region is composite until the second cycle is so far advanced that the landforms of the first cycle are entirely destroyed. The contrast between the land surfaces of the water and the earlier cycles is most striking when the earlier had advanced to age, and the later is still in youth. Thus many peneplains which have been elevated and dissected have been recognized by the remnants of their ancient erosion surfaces, and the length of time which has elapsed since their uplift has been measured by the stage to which the new cycle has advanced. As an example of an ancient peneplain uplifted and dissected, we may cite the Piedmont Belt, a broad upland lying between the Appalachian Mountains and the Atlantic coastal plain. The surface of the Piedmont is gently rolling. The divides, which are often smooth areas of considerable width, rise to a common plain, and from them one sees in every direction an even skyline, except where in places some lone hill or ridge may lift itself above the general level. The surface is an ancient one, for the mantle of residual waste lies deep upon it. Soils are reddened by long oxidation, and the rocks are rotted to a depth of scores of feet. At present, however, the waste mantle is not forming so rapidly as it is being removed. The streams of the uplands are actively engaged in its destruction. They flow swiftly in narrow, rock-walled valleys, over rocky beds. This contrast between the young streams and the aged surface, which they are now so vigorously dissecting, can only be explained by the theory that the region once stood lower than at present, and has recently been upraised. If now we imagine the valleys refilled with the waste which the streams have swept away and the upland lowered, we restore the Piedmont region to the condition in which it stood before its uplift and dissection, a gently rolling plain, surmounted here and there by isolated hills and ridges. And I think I'm going to leave it there. As always, you can pick up where we've left off on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night and sweet dreams.